This is video number 4 of the reading commentary, Paraphrase of Shem. This particular text outlines the first 3 essences emanated by the monad, dark and light, and then the little light. Dark is at the beginning known as the pure water, whereas light is considered the pure light, both representing the male and female aspect. Water being female in nature, helping to create form for the light, and light being of the male nature or the masculine nature, which is representing the will of the mother-father. These interplayed at the beginning, creating a kind of harmony between one another until darkness began to find envy and eventually bitterness, and therefore became from pure water to putrid water, as described in this text. And this is what set forth division and separation, as darkness had envy of light, seeing itself inferior to light, and out of its inferiority created division, and therefore that division allowed for darkness to rule over other entities, presenting itself as a kind of lord. This then brought about dissension of creation. This dark aeon or form or essence eventually is presented with the little light, and it uses the little light in order to not only entice it, but to inject or ejaculate mind into it. And this mind is what was requested by the Christ according to the Gospel or the secret book of John. Mind of man is what allows the little light to be in what's called the middle region, and that is the area where difference between dark and light interplaying between one another allows for the recognition of differences, and that difference then brings about awareness. And that is what the mind is about, going from complete ignorance and complete darkness and rising up or ascending to fullness of understanding and gnosis. Nature was enticed, maybe consider nature to be another symbol of the feminine, or Sophia, in this case Akamoth or Pistis Sophia. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. FGCC listener had presented a really great question relating to Sophia that also relates to this text, and so I think it is relevant and is showing up in a very opportune moment. Nature could be equated to the logos of this universe, and also the lower aspect of Sophia, just as all beings have 3 parts of themselves, thrice male child, brought about by Borbello, the mother, and that is the lower or material part, the soul or psychic part, and then finally the spiritual or nomadic part. And that's going to become important when we read the comment from this listener and I provide my response. How it's described in this text is described as nature, because this is at the early stages of the whole process of emanation, even before the creation of the material realm, that it's described as nature. Mind was injected into the material realm, or the Kanoma, by the darkness. And again, that's only because darkness see itself as inferior to light and thereby become envious, and then also cope with that envy emotively through bitterness. It would then continue to have that bitterness against all of its creation, not its emanation, but its creations, when division had come about or evil had been introduced, when darkness had descended into putridness. And this is the way we understand these nominal terms, as they are abstract in nature, because everything before the pleroma that was emanated in all the aeons, as well as the higher realms, along with this material realm, the Kanoma, everything was in fact abstract from the human perspective. There was nothing material. And so eventually this realm would be created, but we're going to get into that as we proceed. And eventually what's called the light, described by the spiritual being or the voice or a spiritual being that's talking to the writer of this text, Shem, Derdakeas, is equated to the first spiritual being, a kind of Christos or Christ. Eventually, Christ would find himself coming into this realm, leaving behind his garment, which is his spiritual body, in order to come into this realm as the Jesus man, and then fulfill his mission to bring light to man so that man's light or little spirit's light would not be diminished or evaporate because of darkness and because of nature. Nature, again, being the logos of this realm, and how it plays itself out and interplays with man's actions. This distinction between darkness and light also allows for free will. So again, this can become very quickly complex because they are described in abstract terms. We don't have a kind of literal writing, but we have a descriptive sort of presentation of abstract terms, hinting at or giving us an idea of these entities that to us maybe don't make sense from a literal standpoint, but are only familiar to us because of our archetypes that we have about what dark represents versus what light represents, so forth and so on. All right, now with that, let's go to the comment left on video number 3 from this reading commentary of this text. And it comes from Oh So Jasmine. Thank you for all your great comments, Oh So Jasmine. And she has written here, in Pistis Sophia, it discusses how Sophia had a desire to know the light. Now, before we go into what she's written here, Pistis Sophia is not found in the Nag Hammadi. It's a separate Gnostic text that was actually found, I think it was somewhere in the 1700s. And it's quite significant because it's made up of 6 books and it's very lengthy. But a good part of that particular set of books is written about Christ's years, I think roughly 11 years that he had gone away from the disciples, and he had fulfilled various different things that he wanted to complete before he would return back to the disciples. But also a good part of the book also talks about Sophia, as well as the cosmology of this universe, the Kanoma. But in that particular book, it is very different from the way we understand Sophia and why she'd come to this realm compared to some of the other texts we've read, particularly the Secret Book of John, that very clearly outlines that Sophia was one of the aeons in the pleroma. But in this text, Sophia is only able to get up to the 12th realm. She was in the 13th realm, I believe it is. I have to go back and read it, but this is my recollection. And then she was enticed into the 12th realm. That's just outside the pleroma. The 13th realm going into, from the Kanoma into the pleroma. So it's the highest realm that exists before you go into the space of the pleroma where the monad resides. But in the Pistis Sophia text, it outlines that she was essentially kept there, somewhere between just below the 12th realm, 13th and 12th realm. Oh So Jasmine points this out, and she wants to understand the discrepancy between the way Sophia is described in the Secret Book of John and why she'd come into this realm versus the way Pistis Sophia describes why Sophia is in this realm. She writes here, it discusses how Sophia had a desire to know the light, which upset her partner. Now, this is the description of the why Sophia had been ousted outside of the, in this case, what Pistis Sophia, the text calls the realm of light, or the holy lights, whereas in the other Gnostics we've read up to now, it's called the pleroma. But it also is called the realm of silence and motion, or also called the realm of light and water. But essentially it's called the pleroma, most of the text that you get in the Gnostic text, or at least from the Nag Hammadi. And it recounts, and this is in the most of the Nag Hammadi, describes that she wanted to be like the Father, but the anomaly came about because she didn't recognize that she already was like the Father. So she had a diminishment of the way she perceived herself. That diminishment then brought about the anomaly, because then she felt unworthy of receiving the Father. So she rushed toward the Father, wanting to embrace the Father fully, but of course was unable to do so because the monad is infinite, so she could not embrace the monad fully. And so this is what brings about the anomaly, because it created a ignorance about her state, that she is at the level of the mother father, but she couldn't accept that she was of that essence. Much of this is coming out of her overwhelming gratitude for having been emanated by the mother father, and so she wanted to eventually find a way to show herself worthy, not recognizing the mother father didn't require this of her, but this is the way she saw it. And so this is what it meant then when she came into this realm. She wanted to get back to that light, so therefore she desired the light. We want to understand, we think about Sophia, as I pointed out earlier, she too is made up of three parts, and that is the spiritual Sophia, which resides in the pleroma. She didn't get cast out of the pleroma, but she brought herself down to the 13th realm, just outside the pleroma. And she committed herself to staying there until she could correct what's called her deficiency. So that's basically the first introduction of the first sin, which is the first mark of misunderstanding. That's all that sin means. So she didn't understand, again, that she was at the level of the Father Mother. And so she then went into the 13th realm, or the realm of the light. She desired to know this light because she wanted to understand how she could correct her misunderstanding and get back to the pleroma. And so this is what you're seeing here. Sophia in the realm of the pleroma is known as Sophia Christos. So she's with the Christ, just as Jesus Christ, the man is risen up, is the material incarnation of the Christ man, just as we all are. The lower Sophia, the Akamoth Sophia, which is known as wisdom in Hebrew, and Sophia is Latin wisdom. That lower Sophia, the material, the law Sophia, what you're going to get here in what's being described in Pistis Sophia. So Pistis Sophia is the Sophia that's at the level of the 13th realm. That's the one that has faith. Pistis means faith or faithfulness. Sophia had faith that she would return to the pleroma once she corrected the anomaly or the misunderstanding. But she took it upon herself out of great pains to sacrifice her body, to become the material body, to become nature. Well, that's Akamoth. The lower Sophia is Akamoth, or nature. That's the logos of this universe. So this is what you're getting. She desired to know the light, which upset her partner. Now, the partner that we're talking about here in the realm of light is not the Christ. It is a different entity. It's known as self-will, but it's not the will of the Mother Father or the will of Christ, but it's self-will, which is a completely different entity. That particular entity in the 13th realm was displeased with the fact that she wanted to know the light rather than keeping herself mysterious. So in other words, darkness should be mysterious, and the feminine represented darkness. But by knowing light, that light would know her and then reveal her darkness, which then would expose her. And so this is where the ones that want to control the feminine aspect, this is where it all starts. The need to control the feminine and to put it back into sort of the Pandora's box would bring about, of course, patriarchy and all of the desecrations that are enacted upon the feminine, including Pistis Sophia, that would be degraded down to Akamoth Sophia. So that's what we want to understand. The three levels of Sophia. There's Sophia Christos, Pistis Sophia, and there's Akamoth Sophia. Just as we all have three levels. Just as there's Jesus the man, the material Christ, then there's Sabaoth, or Sabaoth, which is the soul or ascended Christ, which is at the soul level, and then there's the Christos, which is at the Christ level, which is at the spiritual level. And so too this is the case with Sophia. What's happening is it's describing what's happening to Pistis Sophia, not Sophia Christos, which is a different Sophia. Now they're all the same Sophia, but they're different experiences Sophia's having through her different parts of herself. And so this is what we're getting. So her partner was displeased with the fact that she was obsessed with knowing the light instead of performing her mysteries with him. And so, in other words, this is something that should only be between her and her self-will, keeping herself in darkness, keeping herself in ignorance, because darkness is supposed to be shrouded. And light isn't something that the feminine is supposed to know. And only self-will would contain it, keep it to itself. He conspired with other aeons who also were bothered by her obsession to create a false light and lead her out of the pleroma. Now here also Jasmine is describing leading her out of the pleroma. Now the 13th realm is called the 13th heaven, not the pleroma, although pleroma and heaven are often interchanged. So it does get quickly confusing. Are we talking about the pleroma where the monad is? Or are we talking about pleroma as we're referring to heaven? Well, really the pleroma is anywhere there's fullness. But there's the state of pleroma, which is fullness, and then there's the pleroma. We could think of it almost analogous to a materially physical place. Whether that's actually the case or not, we don't know. It is a space in which the monad is. Not sure if she's being ousted out of the pleroma in this case or out of heaven, but my guess it's talking about the 13th heaven. So this trick worked. Pistis Sophia is then tricked into coming into this realm. That's the Kanoma realm, below the 13th heaven. And then she's now there permanently. Actually, she's in the 8th heaven now, along with Sabaoth. She goes in and out of the 8th and 7th heaven, along with Sabaoth. So at any rate, this is the way the Gnostic text described this. It goes on and talks about, and they brought her below the waters and raped her of her light and defiled her and brought her into the material realm until Christ came to help restore her light. He found her under the 13th heaven. That's what I gained from it. But I do see a lot of different texts implying she birthed the Demiurge by accident or out of the desire to be like the light, but mistakenly created a mistake. So she desired to be like the light, not recognizing she was already the light. She was part of the light. And so that misunderstanding is what brought about wickedness, or brought about ignorance. But ignorance allowed for the distinction from gnosis. And that distinction then brings about the potential for awareness, because what it does, it provides the one experiencing both ignorance and gnosis a distinction, and that distinction then brings about awareness. There's a recognition that something is different, and that difference then sets off ever cascading more and more growing in awareness. Oh, so Jasmine writes here, but I do see a lot of different texts implying she birthed the Demiurge by accident or out of desire to be like the light, but mistakenly created a mistake. But also noting this was in the will with the all. Please clarify this for better understanding. Now the last part here, where you're writing also noting this was in the will with the all. The way I understand the monad is the monad does not emanate with a particular plan of action. Because if it were to do that, we would just be automatic. There would be no free will. Instead, the way I understand the way the monad emanates is by setting forth a way of things. That way of things then allows everybody to choose for themselves how they're going to find their own process, their own will. The way I understand it isn't as though the monad willed man to descend and to experience suffering and death, but instead, it is that anything that is not of light and of gnosis or knowledge results in suffering, results in death, results in negative or bad outcomes, simply because it is outside of that thing called life and the all-knowing. It can't be otherwise, because the monad is everything that really is, and everything that is outside the monad is everything that is not. It's an illusion. Everything that we're experiencing, death is an illusion. Suffering is an illusion. It's fleeting. Everything in this realm, kanoma, that is material is an illusion. It's fleeting. It comes and goes. For a moment, tricks you into believing that it's real. This is the same thing as being described here with Pistis Sophia. For a moment, she was tricked by that very thing that she told herself, that the material thing is real. In other words, she believed for a moment that she was not the light. That was a falsity, and that created material substance. That material substance is essentially dead matter. That thing that really doesn't matter ultimately, it's dead, never was alive, it never was real. And so it was a false notion, a misunderstanding. But it's not as though the mother-father is creating your mind to have completely only correct thoughts. Because if it were to do that, a couple things would happen. Number one, all of the emanated beings would just be the mother-father. That's it. There would be no distinction. It would allow that instead it could make a choice between ignorance or gnosis. And that also brings about free will. Because if you're just going to create it completely all-knowing, then it's no different than the mother-father. This is why Sophia, she had the wisdom To understand that, it's an anomaly, yes, because nothing like it ever happened before. And where some people would consider it as a mistake, and I know you've written here she had mistakenly done this. The way I understand the Gnostic text is it wasn't in fact a mistake. It was a choice that she had made. She was the one punished herself. She was following through her misunderstanding. In other words, this idea you aren't at the level of the mother father already when you were created by the mother. If you're of the essence of the mother father, which is light, how could you not be light? Really, this is about her wanting to know herself. She wanted to know the light. I'm not seeing it as a mistake, but I'm seeing it as a choice. And the choice was she was choosing free will. Whether she was aware of or not is not clear. At any rate, this is what I think is that the mother father did allow for these choices that you could have eternal life and not have suffering and all this and death, or you can choose the other. But the mother father would allow for it because otherwise, there'd be no free will. It'd be like someone who has a child that's always wanted to keep in the corner safe, never to have harm. If we were to think of the mother father sending us here purposely, and it was in the mother father's plan, and we're fated this way, then that would be cruel. Opposite would be completely not cruel, actually liberating us to discover for ourselves how we want to choose the path to understanding. And then it also allows us not only to ascend, but to actually experience, not to just be given knowledge, but to experience gaining knowledge and the actual essence of what it feels like to have those moments of epiphany or Gnostic moments. And that's the very juice of life, you see. That's the very thing that we're all really here for. Those moments of discovery, those aha moments, are the most revelatory and incredible moments you can have. So that's really what I'm seeing here. Hopefully this has clarified it for you, oh so Jasmine. Just let me know if you'd like further clarification, what I understand about this potential difference between the way the Nag Hammadi describes Sophia versus the way Pistis Sophia is describing Sophia and why she had come into the Kanoma. With that, I just want to let you know that at some point we will consider reading and commenting Pistis Sophia, but I haven't made a decision on if and when, because, or whether or not we even might, because it's very, exhaustive. It literally has anywhere from 60 to over 100 chapters per book. So you can see that would take us a long time. But what I might do is I might do sort of a skim through some of these books. Now, having said that, let's do a little bit of the reading commentary where we left off from our last video. And here we're getting into Derdakeas dons a fiery garment and has sex with nature. When we think about sex in the Bible or Gnostic texts, again, remember this is using sex as an analogous to a kind of intercourse or a way of interjecting or interceding. So Derdakeas dons a fiery garment. And so the garment that was prior is a spiritual garment. This one's a fiery garment. So fiery garment, you could think of it as like the burning of the flesh. So it is one of passion, one of desire, and has interplay with nature. So it's written, then, by the will of the Majesty, I took off my garment of light, put on another garment of fire, which has no form, which is from the mind of the power, which was separated, which was prepared for me, according to my will, in the middle region. And again, this is the entrance of the Son of God into this realm, taking off the former garment of light and putting on the garment of fire. For it had a passion that it brought with it. So it goes on to the middle region, which is this region of the battle between dark and light. For the middle region covered it with the dark power that I might come and put it on. So in other words, it's shrouded in mystery so that it can't be prematurely thwarted or destroyed, this mystery that it was going to bring, this mission. I went down to chaos to save the whole light from it, for without the power of darkness, I could not oppose nature. Again, darkness is one of the former essences in the pleroma. It is not good or evil. It is just one of the essences. It's water. It's the feminine aspect. It is what allows for formation of the will. And so without that dark, he could not oppose nature. And so what's nature? That is the logos of this realm. That thing that is native to the Kanoma in the way it thinks, in the way it governs. When I came into nature, she was not able to tolerate my power, but I rested myself upon her staring eye, which was a light from the Spirit, for it has been prepared for me as a garment and rest by the Spirit. Through me, he opened his eyes down to Hades. He granted nature his voice for time. And my garment of fire, according to the will of the Majesty, went down to what is strong and to the unclean portion of nature that the power of darkness was covering. And my garment rubbed nature in her covering, and her unclean femininity was strong. And the wrathful womb came up and made the mind dry, resembling a fish that has a drop of fire and a power of fire. And when nature had cast off the mind, she was troubled and wept. It's talking about the soul. So when she finally gives up the soul, she's losing the psychic self. When she was hurt and in her tears, she cast off the power of the Spirit and remained as I am. In other words, she remained as the light was, or Derdakeas was, the Christ was, because that was her original form. I put on the light of the Spirit and rested with my garment on the account of the sight of the fish. This is the age of Pistis. This is Pistis Sophia, the faith, resembling faith, and that the deeds of nature might be condemned, since she is blind. Manifold animals came out of her, in accordance with the number of the fleeting winds. All of them came into being in Hades, searching for the light of the mind that took shape. They were not able to stand up against it. I rejoiced over their ignorance. So this is talking about all the various different creations coming out of nature, came forth from light, that came forth from the essence of the monad. But it is ignorance that allowed this process to be shrouded, to be hidden from the Demiurge, the lower form of darkness. It is ignorance that allowed this to remain a mystery. And this is why Derdakeas rejoices for ignorance. And so this allows Derdakeas to essentially intercede into this realm stealthily. He uses here Derdakeas' fool's nature, but remember, these are not written in the original text. This is just headings written by whoever's translating this. And creation begins. All right, so these are all of the various different animal souls or entities that are going to come about. Now, it's preparing all of these shrouded as seeds. And so then they found me, the Son of the Majesty, in front of the womb that has many forms. This is when creation begins. Not emanation, but creation. This is when material realm begins to take shape. I put on the beast, and I laid before her a great request that heaven and earth might come into being, so that the whole light might rise up. Remember when Sophia, she was enticed in the lower realms by the archons and her counterpart, self-will, and the archons into the lower realm, the canonic realm. Or she's bringing herself down from the pleroma into the 13th realm. Understand, she's bringing with her all of her light. And so then she has the afterbirth. She has the abortive Yaldabaoth, or Demiurge, that resulted. In other words, her diminishment of self brought about a deformed representation of the monad's original intention. And that deformed representation did contain within it light, but it was lost. It was lost and scattered. Basically scattered into all these beings. So each one of these beings are basically diminished into ignorance because of what she birthed. She birthed the first great ignorance. And that great ignorance, then basically what it is, abstractly, we could think of it as being analogous to like cups that are scooping up light. Each one is scooping up light. And we're all basically gathering literally trillions of bits of Sophia scattered throughout the universe. And we're gathering all that light and we're taking it back where she originally belonged, which is the pleroma. So that's the way that Gnostic lore is, the cosmology of what's happening, and what's happening, currently is always, from the beginning of the Canoma to now, what's happening. So this is what it's describing. It's saying that I put on the beast and laid before her a great request, that heaven and earth might come into being, so that the whole light might rise back up. And so this is literally what the Christ is doing. He come here, the Word made flesh. He made himself flesh through Sophia, having, where it talked about here earlier, sex with nature, putting his seed into this realm, the Christ energy, into everything. And that then births little Christs. Each one of those Christs is scooping up a bucket of light, so to speak, and then is taking it back when it completes its mission or its accomplishment. And so that's what it's talking about here, so that the whole light might rise up. And no other way could the power of the Spirit be saved from bondage except that I appear to her in animal form. Why? Because this is how she saw herself. She debased herself. Remember, Christ had come to her, the partner that she didn't consult with, her consort. She couldn't face him at this point. And so if Christ came to her, then she would have rejected him, not because of him, but because of disappointment in herself. And so this is what he's talking about here. He's saying that this is the only way she could accept me, that I too debase myself at her level. Therefore, she was gracious to me as if I were her son, because she understood that lower form, because it's how she saw herself. So she's reflecting what she saw in herself through the animal form. And on account of my request, nature arose, since she possessed the power of the spirit and the darkness and the fire. This is what moved her, those opposites. So she possessed everything. She was complicated. She in self-time was Sophia the Christ, but also she was the fire, which is the soul, which is Pistis Sophia, but she was also the lower Sophia, darkness, which is Sophia Akamoth, Sophia. For she had taken all her forms. She was the first to do that. Not even the Christ had done that. She did that first. The female did that first. The feminine nature did that first, not the masculine. Masculine followed after to come down to complete the story here. When she had cast it off, she blew upon the water. The heaven was created. So she's casting off little by little what she deemed to be a mistake. Her self-hatred. Every time she could love herself a little more, something miraculous happened. The heavens were created. Next time the earth was created, stars created, universes were created. It was magical. The monad's way of reminding her to love yourself is a beautiful thing. And that's what's happening here. And from the foam of the heaven, the earth came into being. And at my wish, it brought forth all kinds of food in accordance with the number of the beasts. And this is the crystallizing, Christalizing. And it brought forth dew from the winds on account of you and those who will be conceived the second time upon the earth. For the earth possessed the power of chaotic fire. The one prior was, of course, the perfect human. Therefore, it brought forth every seed. And when the heaven and the earth were created, my garment of fire arose in the midst of the cloud of nature and shone upon the whole world until nature became dry. And so here's the second time it described nature being dry. In other words, it is taking all of the essence of the light out of that particular entity. It's drying it up. And that's what the Demiurge is doing. He's basically just drinking up all of the juices. So the darkness that was with the earth's garment was cast into the harmful waters. The middle region was cleansed from the darkness, but the womb grieved because of what had happened. She perceived in her parts water like a mirror. And so this is what I was talking about before. Everything you're seeing here, the suffering is Sophia. The way she's seeing herself is her own suffering. When she perceived it, she wondered how it had come into being. Remember, when she came into this realm as Akamoth Sophia, she went into forgetfulness because she went into darkness. So she had to relearn everything. Therefore, she remained a widow. It also was astonished that it was not in her. So in other words, she could not bring herself to forgive herself for but with her not consorting with her partner, with her consort. And so she remained a widow. She would promise not, to ever engage with anyone until she could find her back self with her consort. It also was astonished that it was not in her, for still the forms possessed the power of fire and light. So the thing that was not in her is her essence. The power remained, that it might be in nature until all the powers are taken away from her. So this power that was not in her instead was transferred to all of nature, and it was all taken away from her. From just as the light of spirit was completed in 3 clouds, it is necessary also that the power that is in Hades be completed at the appointed time. And those 3 clouds, the thrice male. For because of the grace of the majesty, I came forth to her from the water for the second time. And what's the first time? Well, the pure water. And this time from the water which is the dark waters, which is this realm. For my face pleased her. Her face also was glad. So this is the first moment that she had found some degree of happiness, when she saw the light in everything that had been created. All the animals, the trees, nature, the humans that would eventually come. This brought her solace. Why? Because Christ had entered into each one of these in secret. That's the great mystery. And she recognized it, but she didn't know what it was. But she knew that she knew it. And so that's why she's wisdom. But we're going to continue explicating on this particular book in the next video. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, have a blessed day.